I dedicated my life to my family. I paid the bills, took care of my grandson, gave everything I had, until I heard the worst phrase possible: find somewhere else to live. I cried like never before. But what they didn't expect was that I'd reveal the secret that would destroy their plan. And for you to understand how I got to this point, how a devoted mother found herself kicked out of the very house she built with her own hands, I need to tell you how it all started. Because this real story isn't just about betrayal. It's about a woman who hit rock bottom and decided to climb back up, no matter the cost. And if you've been through something similar or know someone who's going through it, leave a comment down below. Sometimes we just need to know we're not alone in this. So take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and just how far a person can go when desperation comes knocking at the door. You know when you feel something in the air, but can't quite explain what. That's how I'd been feeling for the past few months. Every call with Emily seemed to carry this invisible weight, a tension I couldn't name. Her voice on the phone had changed. Less warmth, less time, less love. I'd sit there, holding my cell phone after she hung up, wondering what I'd done wrong. Did I talk too much? Did I ask something I shouldn't have? My elderly mother's heart started tightening with an anxiety I knew all too well. The feeling of losing my daughter, but not understanding why. And the worst part was pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. After my husband passed away, that incredible man, a Navy veteran who dedicated his life to his country and to me, I swore I'd do anything for our daughter. Emily was all I had left of him, you know? Our greatest legacy, our story continuing. When she told me she was struggling financially, that Brian had lost out on a promotion and the bills were piling up, I didn't hesitate. I paid the electric bill, helped with the car loan, covered my little grandson's kindergarten. That's what a mother does, right? You take care of your own, you protect them, you give what you can, and even what you can't. But as time went on, I noticed my help wasn't generating gratitude. It was generating expectation. And expectation, when it's not met, turns into resentment. The calls that used to happen every day started dwindling like a candle at the end of the night. From daily, they became weekly, then bi-weekly, until I was always the one calling first. And when I called, Emily would answer with that tone of someone who'd been interrupted from something important. "Hi, Mom, I'm busy right now. Can I call you back later?" But later never came. I'd stare at the phone, waiting, feeling that lump in my throat you get when you realize you're bothering someone. Was I being dramatic? Was it all in my head? But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. A mother feels these things. It's instinct. It's connection. It's years of love that teach you to read every silence. The visits also started becoming rare, and when they did happen, they felt more like protocol than genuine desire. Emily would arrive with this tight smile, glancing at the clock every 5 minutes, like she was fulfilling an obligation. Brian barely came into my house, always had an excuse ready: meeting, appointment, car to wash. I'd try to make conversation, offer coffee, cookies I'd baked that morning. But the conversation would die before it even started. My grandson, who used to run to hug me, now just stayed glued to his tablet, distracted. I felt like a stranger in my own family's life. And that, my God, that eats away at you from the inside in a silent and cruel way. It was during one of those quick visits that Emily dropped the first bomb disguised as concern. "Mom, don't you think it's getting hard to take care of that big house all by yourself?" The question came out of nowhere, while she scrolled through her phone, not even looking at me. I said I was fine, that I loved my house, that it was where I felt close to her father. She gave that corner smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes, and mumbled, "Yeah, but sometimes we need to be practical, right? Practical?" What the hell did she mean by that? I didn't have the courage to ask right then, but the phrase kept hammering in my head for days. Something was being planned. I could feel it. The hints started becoming more frequent and sharper. "Mom, you don't understand how hard it is nowadays. We have expenses you can't even imagine." Or, "Your generation had it so much easier, you don't know what real pressure is." Each phrase was an emotional stab, a way to make me feel guilty for existing, for having helped. I'd swallow my tears, force a smile, and change the subject, but inside I was bleeding. I didn't deserve to be treated like this. Not after everything I'd done, everything I'd given, everything I'd sacrificed. But can an ungrateful daughter see that? Does she even care? Brian, oh Brian. That gold digger's son-in-law, who at first seemed so polite, so helpful. Over time, the mask started falling. He began looking at me differently, like he was evaluating me, calculating my worth, not as a person, but as a number. I'd see him and Emily whispering in corners, interrupting their conversation when I got close. Once, I caught him looking at photos of my house on his phone. When I asked what it was, he gave some lame excuse about real estate market research. Market research? Of my house? My stomach turned, but I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it. But I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. One Sunday afternoon, after a tense lunch where we barely talked, Emily said something that made me freeze. "Mom, have you ever thought that maybe you're holding us back?" She said this looking straight into my eyes with a coldness that gave me chills. Holding them back? Me? The woman who paid their bills when they couldn't, who took care of their grandson when they needed it, who was always there. I tried to ask what she meant, but she brushed it off, said she was tired, that I was misinterpreting. But the phrase kept echoing, and I knew deep down that this wasn't fatigue. It was the beginning of something terrible. The weeks that followed were a silent nightmare. Messages without replies, calls going to voicemail, empty excuses whenever I tried to schedule a visit. I found myself staring at my phone for hours, waiting for a sign of life. "Hi, Mom, I miss you." But nothing came. It was like I'd become a ghost in their lives, someone they preferred to forget. And Brian? He didn't even pretend anymore. When I showed up, he'd leave the house, slam the car door, and disappear. The message was clear. I wasn't welcome. My presence bothered them. But why? What had I done that was so terrible to deserve this treatment? I didn't know back then. But that distance, those hints, that strange behavior, it was all part of a much bigger plan. Emily and Brian weren't just pulling away from me. They were preparing me for something. Something that would involve the house my husband and I built brick by brick, the only sacred thing I had left in this world. And when I discovered the truth, when I understood just how far they were willing to go, well, that's a real story you won't believe until the end. But to understand the depth of the betrayal, you need to know what that house meant to me. Let me tell you about that house, because without understanding what it represented, you won't be able to feel the pain of what comes next. It wasn't just a property. It wasn't just walls and a roof. That house was the materialization of 40 years of love, sweat, and shared dreams. My husband and I built every room with our own hands, on a piece of land his family left us as an inheritance. It was a typical Charleston Southern home. Wide porch with those white columns, rocking chairs where we'd spend our afternoons, magnolias blooming in the garden he planted for me. Every floorboard had a story, every window held a memory. It was where we raised Emily, where we celebrated birthdays, where we cried over losses and celebrated victories. It was simply our place in the world. I remember like it was yesterday, the day we put the first stake in the ground. My husband, with that wide smile and eyes shining with hope, told me, "Margaret, this is where we're going to grow old together. Watch our grandchildren run through this yard." And that's exactly what happened. At least while he was alive. We raised those walls on weekends, with help from friends and neighbors, the way it used to be done. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was ours. Every nail hammered was a promise of the future. Every painted wall was a piece of our heart staying there, eternalized. When it was finally finished, about 5 years after we started, we cried with joy on that porch. That was our legacy. Emily grew up in that house. She learned to walk in the living room hallway, had her first birthday party under the oak tree in the backyard, cried over her first love sitting on the porch. But, I'll admit, she never showed the same attachment my husband and I had. Since she was a teenager, Emily talked about wanting something more modern, that Charleston was too old-fashioned, that she dreamed of living in Atlanta or Charlotte, in some minimalist apartment with those magazine furniture pieces. I thought it was just a phase, that youthful desire to go out into the world, experience new things. I never imagined that, in reality, she truly didn't see any value in that place. To her, it was just an old house. To me, it was everything. Brian, from the first day he set foot there, made it clear he didn't understand anything. "It's charming," he said, with that tone of someone being polite but not feeling anything. I saw the way he evaluated everything with calculator eyes. The lot size, the location, the structure. To him it was an investment, it was equity, it was money sitting idle. During one visit, he even commented, "You know how much a property like this is worth in Charleston? Investors pay fortunes for historic homes." I pretended I didn't hear, but my stomach churned. That gold digger son-in-law didn't see history there, he saw dollar signs. And worse, I noticed Emily started agreeing with him. Her comments about the house changed. It was no longer Grandma's house, it was that big property. It was after my husband's death that everything got worse. I clung to that house like a shipwreck victim clings to a piece of wood in the ocean. It was the only place where I still felt his presence, where memories were so vivid that sometimes I swore I could hear his voice calling me from the workshop. I'd sit in the porch rocking chair and talk to him, tell him how my day went, share my worries. I know it might seem crazy, but it was my way of not losing it, of not sinking into loneliness. That house kept me alive, gave me purpose. And it was exactly in this moment of vulnerability that Emily and Brian started tightening the noose. When you're vulnerable, it's easier for them to convince you of anything, isn't it? The suggestions started subtle, almost innocent. "Mom, isn't it too much work taking care of everything alone? Don't you think it's dangerous living in such a big house with nobody around? What if something happens at night? Who's gonna help you?" I'd answer that I was fine, that I had neighbors, that I knew every corner of that house and felt safe. But they insisted, until the suggestion stopped being subtle and became pressure. "Mom, you need to be rational. Selling this house and buying something smaller would be the smartest thing." Smart for whom, Emily? For you and Brian, who are already counting money that doesn't even exist yet? But I didn't say that out loud. I still didn't have the courage to admit what was happening. Brian started bringing useful information every time he came over. Articles about Charleston's real estate market, ads for smaller apartments, even contacts for realtors. "Just so you have an idea of the value, mother-in-law," he'd say, pushing papers in front of me. I'd look at those numbers and feel nauseous. It wasn't about the value. It was never about money. But to him, everything came down to that. And Emily? She'd stand beside him, nodding in agreement, like they were a rehearsed team. I felt cornered, pressured, like they were trying to remove me from my own body. That house was my skin, my beating heart. And they wanted me to simply rip it all off and throw it away. One afternoon, Emily arrived with a folder full of options for my new life. One-bedroom apartments in senior living communities, sterilized places without soul, without history, without anything that resembled a home. "Look how practical it would be, Mom. Everything on the same floor, 24-hour security, activities for senior citizens." Senior citizens, like I was some senile old lady who needed to be put in a box. I said I wasn't interested, that house was my home and I wasn't leaving. It was the first time I saw Emily's face truly harden. "You're being stubborn, Mom. We just want what's best for you." But it wasn't my best they wanted. It was the money from the sale. And that became increasingly clear. The conversations about the house became the only topic when they came to see me. They didn't ask anymore how I was, if I was lonely, if I needed company. It was just, "Thought about what we talked about? Did you talk to any realtors? Mom, you can't be selfish about this." Selfish? Me? For wanting to stay in the house that I built, that I paid for, that I maintained all these years? The word echoed in my mind for days. Selfish. Coming from the mouth of my ungrateful daughter, the one I raised with so much love, who I held when she cried, who I protected from everything. And now she called me selfish because I didn't want to hand over on a silver platter the only thing I had left. I didn't know yet, but those conversations, those pressures, those visits loaded with tension were just preparation. Emily and Brian were building a narrative, painting me as the stubborn and irrational mother who needed to be saved from herself. And their next step would be much, much worse. Because when I realized they weren't going to give up, when I understood that this had stopped being a suggestion and become an obsession, it was already too late. They'd already set the plan in motion. And on that rainy afternoon that was approaching, everything was going to explode in a way I never imagined possible. It was an April afternoon, one of those days when Charleston's sky gets heavy and you feel the storm coming before the first drop even falls. I was in the kitchen preparing a lemon cake, the kind Emily loved as a child, when I heard their car parking in front of the house. I found it strange because they hadn't warned me they were coming. but my elderly mother's heart gave that silly little jump of hope. What a nice surprise! I went to the door, drying my hands on my apron, smiling. But when I saw Emily's face, the smile froze on my lips. She was serious, tense, and Brian came right behind her, carrying a black leather briefcase. This wasn't a social visit. It was an ambush. And I, naive as I was, still hadn't realized it. "Mom, we need to talk seriously," Emily said before even coming inside properly. Not a hi, not a kiss, nothing. Just that phrase everyone fears hearing. My stomach sank. When someone starts a conversation like that, you know nothing good comes after. They walked in like they owned the place. Actually, that was exactly what they wanted to be. Brian went straight to the dining room table, opened the briefcase, and started taking out papers, documents, spreadsheets. Emily pulled out a chair and made me sit like I was a child about to receive a lesson. I looked at both of them without understanding anything, my heart already beating irregularly. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's for your own good, Mom," Emily responded. And that phrase, my God, that phrase should come with a warning siren. Brian started talking like a salesman during prime time. "Margaret, look at these numbers here." He spread sheets on the table, colorful graphs, calculations I could barely read without my glasses. "Charleston's real estate market is booming. Historic homes like yours are being sold for absurd amounts. Out-of-state investors, even from other countries, are buying everything." I looked at those papers without really processing. What did he mean? Why did I need to know this? And then he dropped the bomb. "We brought a realtor from the area. He did a preliminary evaluation and, well, your house is worth much more than you imagine. Much more. Like that made a difference. Like money could buy the memories those walls held." That's when the realtor came in. Yes, they'd brought a realtor without warning me. A man in a gray suit, professional smile, business card in hand. "Mrs. Turner, it's a pleasure. I've been following properties in this area, and I can guarantee yours is a rare gem." He started talking about prime location, tourist potential, renovations that would increase the property's value even more. He talked and talked and talked, and all I could hear was a buzzing in my ears. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My daughter had brought a stranger into my house to convince me to sell? I looked at Emily, searching for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, but she looked away. And in that look away, I understood everything. This had been planned, coldly, calculatedly. "Mom, we just want you to have financial security," Emily said, her voice loaded with a fake concern that made me feel sick. "You can sell this house, invest the money, and live peacefully without worrying about maintenance, repairs, taxes." Peacefully? How was I going to live peacefully away from the only place where I still felt my husband close to me? I tried to speak, but the words got stuck in my throat. Brian continued, "And look, it's not like you're going to be left with nothing. We can help you find a comfortable, modern, practical apartment." Comfortable, modern, practical. Empty words to describe a soulless prison. I didn't want practicality. I wanted my home. But to that gold-digger son-in-law, home was just an inconvenient concept that got in the way of his plans. The realtor continued with his presentation, showing photos of similar houses that had been sold, talking about unique market opportunity. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. "In fact, I already have some interested clients, investors who would love to transform this property into something profitable." Profitable. They already had clients. They were already negotiating my house, without me even agreeing to anything. I looked at Emily, my eyes burning with tears I refused to let fall. "Are you already selling my house without me knowing?" My voice came out stronger than I expected. She blinked, surprised, and tried to backtrack. "No, Mom, it's not that. We're just exploring options." Lies. I could see the lie stamped on her face. I got up from the chair, my legs shaking, the world spinning. "I'm not selling. This house is mine. It was your father's, and I'm not leaving here." I spoke, looking directly into Emily's eyes, hoping she'd understand, that she'd go back to being my daughter, that she'd remember who I was. But what I saw was coldness. She sighed in that impatient way, like I was the stubborn child. "Mom, you're being irrational. We're trying to help you, and you won't let us." Irrational. Another word to make me feel crazy, incompetent, unable to decide about my own life. Brian interjected. "Margaret, With all due respect, you need to think about the future. What's going to happen in 5, 10 years? You won't be able to maintain this by yourself. Like he cared about my future. The argument heated up. I said I wasn't signing anything, that they were crossing every line. Emily raised her voice, something she'd never done to me before. You're being selfish. We have a family to support, bills to pay, and you're holding on to this house like it's a treasure when it's just a burden. A burden. My house, my life, my memories, all reduced to a burden. I felt like she'd stabbed me. The realtor tried to calm things down, but I told him to leave. Get out of my house, now. He looked at Emily. She nodded, and he left with that smile of someone who knows they'll be back another day. But Emily and I stayed there, facing each other, and for the first time in my life, I didn't recognize my daughter. When Brian tried to speak again, I exploded. Enough! You came in here, brought strangers, schemed behind my back, and still have the nerve to say it's for my own good? My hands were shaking, my voice failing, but I needed to get it all out. This house isn't for sale. It never was. And if you can't respect that, then maybe it's better you don't come back here anymore. The silence that fell was heavy, suffocating. Emily grabbed her purse, Brian gathered the papers, and they left without looking back. I heard their car disappearing down the street while I collapsed in the chair, my whole body shaking. I cried like I hadn't cried since my husband's funeral. But that wasn't just sadness. It was the pain of realizing that my ungrateful daughter had seen me as an obstacle. And worse, this was far from over. In the following days, the silence was deafening. No calls, no messages, nothing. I tried to convince myself they'd reflect, apologize, recognize they'd been wrong. But deep down, a voice whispered that this had just been the first round. They weren't going to give up. Not that easily. And I was right. Because weeks later, on an ordinary May morning, I was going to discover just how far Emily and that gold-digger son-in-law were willing to go. And when that happened, the ground was literally going to disappear from under my feet. 3 weeks passed since that horrible argument. 3 weeks of absolute silence, like Emily and Brian had vanished from the face of the earth. I alternated between relief and anguish. Relief for not having to deal with their pressure. Anguish for feeling like I'd lost my daughter for good. I tried calling a few times, but the calls went straight to voicemail. I sent messages that were left on read, with no response. It was like I'd become a ghost in their lives. During that time, I clung to routine, took care of the garden, painted the porch fence, made cakes that nobody came to eat anymore. I pretended everything was fine, but inside, I was shattered. Until one Tuesday morning, the mailman rang the doorbell, and my entire life crumbled in a matter of seconds. It was a large envelope, one of those official ones with the stamp of a Charleston law firm. My heart raced before I even opened it. You know when your body reacts before your mind processes? That was it. My hands trembled as I tore the seal, pulling the documents out. There were so many papers they almost fell on the floor. I started reading without really understanding. Legal terms, clauses, numbered paragraphs. But then I saw my name, my address, and Emily's signature as legal representative responsible for the petitioner's estate management. Estate management? Legal representative? I read it again, and again, and again, until it hit me with the weight of a ton of bricks. My daughter had hired a lawyer to try to force the sale of my house. I sat on the living room floor. My legs couldn't hold me anymore. The papers scattered around me looked like monsters ready to devour me. Everything was detailed there. A power of attorney that, according to them, I had supposedly signed authorizing Emily to make decisions about my assets in case of impaired judgment. Impaired judgment? Were they calling me crazy, incompetent? There were medical attachments, reports I'd never seen, signed by a doctor I'd never consulted. They said I showed signs of cognitive decline and difficulty making complex financial decisions. Each word was a lie, a fabrication, a weapon pointed straight at my heart. How did they get that? How did they have the nerve? But the answer was simple and painful. When there's money involved, some people are capable of anything. I grabbed the phone with hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I dialed Emily's number about 5 times until she answered. Hello? Her voice was cold, mechanical. Emily, what the hell is this that arrived here? What's this story about power of attorney, about a lawyer? Silence on the other end. A calculated silence. like she was choosing each word. Mom, we didn't want to get to this point, but you didn't leave us a choice. Didn't leave a choice? Me? You're trying to take my house by force, Emily. You're making up that I'm crazy. My voice came out in screams, tears streaming, chest tightening. And then she said the phrase I'll never forget. We're just doing what needs to be done. You're not seeing reality, Mom. Someone has to make decisions for you. I hung up on her. Or rather, I threw the phone on the couch before I smashed it against the wall. Reality? The reality was that my ungrateful daughter and that gold-digger son-in-law were trying to rob me. There was no other word for it. It was robbery disguised as concern, betrayal wrapped in legal papers. I went back to reading the documents, this time more carefully, and noticed something. The power of attorney had a signature that was supposedly mine. I grabbed a magnifying glass, compared it with my real signature. It didn't match. It was similar, but not identical. They had forged it. My God, they had forged my signature. This was a crime, a federal crime. And they thought I wouldn't notice, that I'd just accept it and hand everything over on a silver platter? I needed help. I couldn't face this alone. I called Ruth, my neighbor of decades, a retired lawyer who'd always been my friend. I explained everything between sobs, showed her the documents. Ruth went pale. Margaret, this is document forgery. This is attempted fraud. You need to act fast before they use this somewhere. She referred me to a lawyer specializing in family law and financial crimes. We scheduled a meeting for that same afternoon. While driving to his office, my head was a hurricane of emotions. Anger, sadness, shame, fear. How had I gotten here? How could the daughter I carried in my womb, who I rocked to sleep, who I protected from everything, how could she be doing this to me? The lawyer, a man named Thomas Griffin, listened to everything attentively. He analyzed the documents, asked questions, wrote everything down. And then he said, Mrs. Turner, you have a strong case. This power of attorney is clearly fraudulent. These medical reports have no validity because you were never examined by this doctor, and there's clear evidence of emotional coercion. Emotional coercion. That's exactly what it was. But hearing it said by a professional made it all more real, heavier. Thomas continued, I'm going to file to nullify these documents, and depending on how they react, we can even sue for attempted fraud. Sue my own daughter. The idea tore me in half. But what else could I do? Let them take everything from me? Let them humiliate me and still come out victorious? I went back home that late afternoon, feeling strangely strong and destroyed at the same time. Strong because I'd taken action, because I hadn't bowed down. Destroyed because the war had officially started, and it was against my own daughter. I sat on the porch, in the same place where my husband used to sit, and looked at the sunset painting, the sky orange and pink. What do I do now? I asked him, as if he could hear me. And I swear I felt a gentle breeze, like it was his answer. You fight, Margaret. You don't give up. And then I made a decision. If Emily wanted war, she'd have war. But she didn't know who she was messing with. 2 days later, I got a call that made my blood run cold. It was Brian. His voice was different. It was no longer that fake, polite gold-digger son-in-law tone. It was aggressive, threatening. Margaret, stop this lawyer nonsense. You're complicating everything for everyone. Complicating? Me? Brian, you guys tried to rob me. You forged my signature. You're the ones who started this. He laughed. A dry, cruel laugh. You know what's going to happen if you don't stop? We're going to prove you're not capable of living alone. We're going to commit you. And then you really lose everything. Commit me? They were going to try to put me in a nursing home? Declare me incapable? The audacity, the pure evil of that left me speechless. And then he dropped the final bomb. And another thing. If you insist on this, you'll never see your grandson again. Never. And he hung up. I was paralyzed. The phone still at my ear, the silence screaming in my ears. They'd gone too far. Way too far. But that threat, instead of breaking me, ignited something inside me that I didn't even know existed. Anger. Pure, boiling anger that burned more than any sadness. I called Thomas and told him everything. He recorded the call. Yes, I had automatically recorded it without even realizing, and said that was intimidation, more proof against them. Now they've buried themselves for good, Margaret. And it was at that moment I understood. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about dignity. It was about showing Emily and Brian that they'd messed with the wrong person. And what they didn't expect was that I was going to fight back with everything I had. After that threatening call, something inside me broke for good. It wasn't sadness that dominated me. It was an exhaustion so deep I could barely get out of bed. I'd look at the walls of my house, those walls my husband and I built with so much love, and saw only a prison. Every room screamed memories of little Emily, family parties, happy Sundays. But now everything was contaminated. How was I going to keep living there knowing that my own ungrateful daughter wanted to rip me from that place? How was I going to sleep in peace, knowing that at any moment they could show up with more papers, more lies, more schemes? I needed to get out. I needed to breathe. I needed to disappear for a while before I went truly crazy. And that's exactly what I did. One Thursday morning, before the sun fully rose, I packed 2 suitcases with the essentials: clothes, some important documents, photos of my husband, and the necklace he gave me on our 20th wedding anniversary. I didn't tell anyone. Not Ruth, not Thomas, nobody. I wrote a quick note to the lawyer saying I needed some time to think, that I'd be in touch soon. I locked the house, took one last look at that porch where so many stories happened, and got in my old car, that sedan that was over 15 years old but still ran well. I didn't know exactly where I was going, just knew I needed to go. I put Savannah, Georgia, into the GPS. It was close enough not to be a cowardly escape, but far enough that I wouldn't be easily found. The trip lasted a little over 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity. I drove on autopilot, my mind wandering between the past and present. I remembered when I took Emily to Savannah for the first time. She was about 10 years old and was enchanted by the historic squares, the oak trees covered in Spanish moss. We ate ice cream sitting on a bench in Forsyth Park, and she said, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to live in a magical place like this." I laughed and said Charleston was already magical. She nodded, smiling. Where did that girl get lost? At what point did she transform into a woman capable of betraying me like that? Tears blurred my vision, and I had to pull over to the shoulder to compose myself. I cried there, alone, in the middle of the road, until I had no more tears to shed. When I arrived in Savannah, I looked for cheap inns, something discreet where nobody would ask many questions. I found one called Magnolia Inn in a quiet neighborhood away from the tourist center. The owner, a black woman about 70 years old named Denise, welcomed me with a warm smile I wasn't expecting. "Need a room, dear?" Her voice had that heavy, comforting Southern accent. I could only nod, my voice stuck in my throat. Denise didn't ask questions. She took me to a small room on the 2nd floor, simple but clean, with a window overlooking a garden full of azaleas. "Stay as long as you need," she said, squeezing my hand. And in that handshake from a stranger, I felt more affection than I'd felt from my own daughter in months. The first few days were a blur of silence and loneliness. I barely left the room, only went down to grab something to eat that Denise insisted on leaving at my door. I'd spend hours lying down staring at the ceiling, my cell phone turned off because I didn't want to talk to anyone. Didn't want to hear Emily's voice, didn't want more threats from Brian, didn't even want Ruth or Thomas's good intentions. I just wanted nothing, an emptiness that would protect me from the pain. But emptiness doesn't work like that, does it? The more you try not to feel, the more emotions swallow you. At night, I'd wake up suffocating, dreaming I was being kicked out of my house, that Emily laughed while I begged to stay. They were nightmares so vivid I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, not knowing if I was still dreaming or not. It was on the 5th day that Denise knocked on the door and wouldn't take no for an answer. "Margaret." "Yes." She already knew my name. I'd filled out the form. "You need to eat properly. Come down with me to the kitchen." I wanted to refuse, but something in her firm voice made me obey. I went down the stairs like a zombie and sat in her kitchen, which smelled of fresh bread and coffee. Denise put a plate in front of me, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, orange juice. "Eat," she ordered, and I ate. Not because I was hungry, but because she was there, watching me with those eyes full of kindness and determination. When I finished, she sat on the other side of the table, crossed her arms and said, "Now tell me what a woman like you is doing running away from life." And for the first time since I arrived, I spoke. I told her everything, every detail, every lie, every betrayal. I talked about the house I built with my husband, the love I gave Emily, the ingratitude I received in return. I talked about the gold digger son-in-law, the fake power of attorney, the threats, the total humiliation they put me through. And Denise listened to everything without interrupting me, just nodding at some moments, sighing at others. When I finished, exhausted from talking so much, she took my hand and said something that changed everything. "Margaret, they didn't just try to take your house. They tried to take your dignity. And dignity, dear, nobody takes that if you don't let them. But for that, you need to go back. You need to fight, because running away won't give you peace. It'll just give them what they want." Her words fell on me like a bucket of cold water. She was right. Running away was handing them victory on a silver platter. In the following weeks, Denise became more than a host. She became my friend, my counselor, almost a sister. We'd spend afternoons talking in her garden, drinking iced tea, and she'd share stories from her own life. Denise had been through difficult things too. An abusive marriage that lasted 20 years, children who drifted away, losses that marked her. But she had survived, rebuilt herself, reconstructed her life from scratch. "You're stronger than you imagine, Margaret," she'd say. And gradually, I started believing it. I started leaving the room, walking through Savannah's streets, feeling the sun on my face again. The pain was still there, throbbing, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. One night, sitting on the inn's porch watching the stars, Denise asked me, "When are you going back?" I stayed silent for a long time. Going back meant facing everything again. Emily, Brian, the lawyers, the legal battle. But it also meant recovering my house, my history, my life. "Soon," I answered. And this time, my voice came out firm. Denise smiled. "When you go, go with your head held high. Because you're not a victim, Margaret. You're a warrior. And warriors don't run. They just retreat to gain momentum." That phrase echoed in me all night. And the next day, I called Thomas. "I'm coming back," I said. "And I want you to prepare everything. Because this time, I'm not backing down." I spent the last days in Savannah preparing myself emotionally. Denise helped me organize my thoughts, outline a plan, strengthen my determination. On the last day before I left, she gave me a tight hug and whispered in my ear, "You're gonna win this. I know you will." I got in the car with the same 2 suitcases, but with a different person inside me. I was no longer the broken and humiliated elderly mother who had fled weeks ago. I was a woman who had hit rock bottom, cried all the tears, but was coming back to recover what was hers. As I drove back to Charleston, one thought hammered in my head. Emily and Brian thought they'd won, but the real emotional story was just beginning, and they had no idea what was waiting for them. It was almost 8 at night when I crossed the bridge into Charleston. The city lights blinked in the distance, familiar yet strange, like I'd been gone for years and not just weeks. My heart beat irregularly, part anxiety, part determination. I hadn't warned anyone I was coming back. Not Thomas, not Ruth, much less Emily. I wanted the element of surprise on my side. I wanted to see with my own eyes what had happened in my absence, what my ungrateful daughter and that gold digger son-in-law had been up to. I drove slowly through the streets of my neighborhood, observing every corner, every house, until I finally turned onto my street. And what I saw made me hit the brakes so hard the seatbelt locked against my chest. My house, that house I'd left locked and untouched, was unrecognizable. There were scaffolds in front, tarps covering part of the facade, a huge dumpster full of debris parked on the sidewalk. The gate my husband had painted white years ago had been replaced with a black iron one, modern, cold. Lights on inside indicated there were people working even at that hour. I felt my stomach turn. They hadn't wasted time. In my absence, Emily and Brian had simply invaded my property and started renovations as if the house was already theirs, as if I didn't exist anymore, as if I had died and left everything as inheritance. The audacity was so great that for a moment I couldn't even process what I was seeing. I parked about 3 blocks away where the car wouldn't be visible and walked back. My whole body trembled, with rage, with shock, with a mixture of emotions I couldn't even name. I got close enough to see better. The porch, that porch where I spent entire afternoons with my husband, was being demolished. The rocking chairs had disappeared. The original columns were on the ground, broken. In their place, they were erecting something more contemporary, with straight lines and no soul. There was a contractor's pickup truck parked in the garage, my garage, with tools scattered around. A man in a hard hat came out the side door carrying boards. He worked calmly, like this was just another job. He didn't know he was participating in a crime. I stood there on the sidewalk, hidden behind the neighbor's tree, watching everything like it was a horror movie. But it wasn't a movie. It was my life being destroyed brick by brick. I thought about going in, screaming, throwing everyone out of there. But something held me back. I needed to be strategic. If I went in now, emotionally uncontrolled, they could use that against me. Say I was unstable, dangerous. They'd already tried to paint me as crazy once. I wasn't going to give them ammunition again. I took a deep breath, counted to 10, and retreated. But before leaving, I took photos. Lots of photos, of every detail, every change, every proof that they had invaded my property without authorization. This was going to be useful, very useful. I was walking back to the car when I heard a voice behind me. "Margaret, is that you?" I turned and saw Mr. Harrison, my neighbor of over 20 years, crossing the street toward me. He was a gentleman, about 75 years old, retired, widowed, always kind. "Mr. Harrison." I tried to smile, but my voice failed. He approached, his face full of concern. "My God, Margaret, where have you been? Everyone's been worried. Ruth has been calling everyone looking for you." Tears threatened to fall, but I held them back. I needed to get away for a while, but now I'm back, and what happened to my house? My voice came out choked, and Mr. Harrison sighed heavily, shaking his head. "Come, let's talk in my backyard. You need to know some things." We sat in the chairs in his garden, away from curious eyes, and Mr. Harrison started telling me, "Margaret, a few days after you disappeared, Emily showed up here with a moving truck, said you'd decided to move to a nursing home, that you'd handed the house over for her to take care of." "A nursing home? Nursing home?" I felt the rage rise like lava. He continued, "We thought it was strange, because you'd never mentioned anything like that. Ruth tried to call you 1,000 times, but your cell phone was off. Then Emily showed some papers, said she had power of attorney, that it was all legal. The fake papers. Those damned fake papers. She started the renovations the following week. Hired a company, is renovating everything. I heard her tell Brian that when they finish, they're gonna put the house up for sale for almost $1 million. $1 million. My house, my home, transformed into merchandise. "There's more," Mr. Harrison said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Me and other neighbors found it all very strange. Ruth went after it, found out you had a lawyer, talked to him. He said you were fine, just needed some time, but that you were coming back, so we decided to keep an eye on things." He looked around like someone might be listening. "Margaret, Emily, and Brian are desperate. I heard them arguing in the garage one night. Brian was saying they had little time, that they needed to sell before you came back. Emily was nervous, saying you were going to ruin everything." My heart raced. They knew I could come back. They knew their time was limited. That's why the rush, the accelerated renovation, the scramble to transform my house into something sellable as quickly as possible. "And the neighbors?" I asked, my voice failing. "What do they think of all this?" Mr. Harrison smiled slightly, a sad but supportive smile. "Margaret, nobody here agrees with what Emily's doing. We've known you for years, saw you and your husband build this house, raise the girl. We know something's wrong." He paused, choosing his words. "Ruth got some people together. There's Mrs. Peterson, me, the Rodriguez couple, young Marcus who lives on the corner. He's a lawyer, offered legal help if you need it. We're on your side, Margaret. You're not alone in this." The tears I'd been holding back until now finally fell. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were of gratitude, of relief, of realizing there was still kindness in the world. I stayed in Mr. Harrison's garden for almost an hour, hearing every detail of what had happened in my absence. He told me Emily rarely showed up. She'd leave the contractors working alone, only stopped by to check progress. Brian came more often, spent hours inside the house with a realtor, showing the rooms, discussing values. They brought people from outside to see the property, Margaret. Investors from Atlanta, from New York, even a guy from London. The house wasn't even theirs yet, and they were already selling it. The arrogance, the certainty they'd succeed, made me sick, but it also gave me strength, because the more confident they were, the bigger the fall would be, and I was going to personally ensure they fell. When I finally got up to leave, Mr. Harrison held my arm. "Margaret, be careful. They've gone too far to give up now, and desperate people are capable of anything. I nodded, thanked him from the bottom of my heart, and went back to the car. I drove to a small motel on the outskirts of town. I couldn't go back to my house yet, not like that. I needed a plan, organization, strategy. I called Thomas and left a message. I'm back. We need to meet tomorrow morning. I have proof. I hung up and looked at the photos I'd taken of the house. Each image was a stab, but also a weapon. Emily and Brian thought they'd won, but they didn't know that the elderly mother who had fled humiliated had come back, and this time, she wasn't going to give up without a fight. The next morning, I woke up at the motel with my body aching and my mind racing. I'd barely slept. I'd spent all night tossing in bed, thinking about the renovations, the lies, how everything had gone downhill so fast. I took a hot shower trying to relieve the tension, got dressed, and left to meet Thomas at his office. But first, there was something I needed to do. Talk to Mr. Harrison again. Something he'd said the night before kept hammering in my head. That part about Emily and Brian arguing in the garage, about debts, about desperation. I needed to understand better. I needed to know what really motivated all of this, because deep down, I still wanted to believe that my daughter wasn't a complete monster. I wanted to believe there was a reason, however twisted it might be. I arrived at Mr. Harrison's house around 8 in the morning. He was already awake, watering the garden plants like he did every day. When he saw me, he waved and called me inside. I couldn't sleep right, I admitted, sitting in the same chair from the night before. Mr. Harrison, you said you heard Emily and Brian arguing about debts. Can you tell me exactly what you heard? He put down the watering can, wiped his hands on his apron, and sat in front of me, his face serious. Margaret, I didn't want to worry you more than you already are, but their situation is ugly. Very ugly. My stomach tightened. He took a deep breath and started telling a story that made me realize I never really knew my own daughter. It was on a weeknight. Must have been around 10 o'clock, Mr. Harrison began. I was closing the windows when I heard raised voices coming from your garage. They'd parked there, thinking nobody would hear. He paused, like he was reliving the scene. Brian was yelling, saying he couldn't take the pressure from creditors anymore, that the banks were going to take everything. Emily was crying, saying if they didn't get money soon, they were going to lose their house, the car, everything. Creditors? Banks? My mind tried to process. Emily always told me the financial difficulties were temporary, just a tight month. She never mentioned the situation was so serious they'd lose everything. Or had she always known and used me as salvation all along? Mr. Harrison continued. Then Brian said something that made me freeze. He said, "Your mother is the only way out. That house is worth a fortune. We need to force her to sell, even if it's by force." I felt like they'd stuck a knife in my chest, force by force. So everything, the fake power of attorney, the invented medical reports, the emotional pressure, everything was part of a desperate plan to take my house and save their own skins. And Emily? I asked, my voice trembling. What did she say? Mr. Harrison sighed heavily. She hesitated a little, but then agreed. Said you were stubborn, that you wouldn't accept selling willingly, and that they needed to take the reins of the situation. That's how she put it. Take the reins. Take the reins. Like I was a disobedient animal that needed to be tamed. But the worst revelation was still to come. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his voice lowering to almost a whisper. Margaret, I did something I maybe shouldn't have. I was so bothered by that conversation that I went to investigate on my own. He pulled a yellowed envelope from inside a drawer. I have a nephew who works with credit analysis. I asked him to take a discreet look at their financial situation. And what he discovered? He paused, like he didn't want to continue. What did he discover? I pressed, my heart racing. He opened the envelope and spread printed papers on the table. Margaret, Emily, and Brian owe over $300,000. $300,000? My eyes widened. In credit cards, student loans they never paid, car loans, even debts to private loan sharks. I picked up the papers with trembling hands, reading each line. Everything was documented there. Overdue invoices, collection letters, debt enforcement lawsuits. How had they gotten to this point? How had they sunk so deep without me knowing? But the answer was obvious, because they hid it. Because every time I offered help, they accepted but never revealed the real extent of the problem. I was a temporary Band-Aid on a wound that had been bleeding for years. There's more, Mr. Harrison said, pointing to a specific document. Brian lost his job almost a year ago. He doesn't work, Margaret. Everything he told you about promotions, projects, work trips, lies. He's unemployed and desperate, and Emily's salary alone doesn't cover even half of their debts. A year. A whole year of lies to my face. I felt a mixture of anger and a sadness so deep it seemed bottomless. As a mother, my instinct was to want to help, to want to hug my daughter and say everything would be okay. But as a victim of this emotional story that had become my life, I knew that helping now was self-destruction. They didn't want help. They wanted a magic solution. And that solution was my house, my sweat, my past and my future transformed into money to pay for their irresponsibility. There's one more thing you need to know, Mr. Harrison said, picking up another paper. The realtor who's showing your house? He's not just any realtor. He specializes in quick sales to foreign investors. These guys buy historic homes, completely renovate them, and turn them into boutique hotels or luxury Airbnbs. My house, my home, becoming a business for tourists to take selfies. According to what my nephew discovered, Emily and Brian are already negotiating with a group from New York, Mr. Harrison continued. These investors agreed to buy the house for $900,000 cash as soon as the legal procedures are resolved. Legal procedures, meaning as soon as they could declare me incapable or force me to sign the transfer. They've already spent part of that money they don't even have yet. They did all the renovations on credit cards, expecting to receive it later and pay everything at once. Their imprudence, arrogance, their certainty of victory was so great it was almost impressive. But it was also their fatal mistake, because they'd exposed themselves too much, committed too much. And now, with all this proof, I had everything I needed to destroy their plan. I thanked Mr. Harrison with tears in my eyes, of gratitude, not sadness. You have no idea how much this helps me, I said. He squeezed my hand. Margaret, that girl you raised must still be somewhere inside Emily. But Brian, that one's a gold-digger son-in-law through and through, and he's dragging her down. You need to cut them out of your life before they destroy you completely. I knew he was right. I knew this battle wasn't going to have a happy ending with reconciliation and hugs. But at least now I understood. It wasn't pure evil. It was desperation mixed with greed. And that, in a way, made everything even sadder. Because it meant my daughter had chosen money, had chosen that man, had chosen betrayal, instead of simply telling me the truth and asking for real help. I left Mr. Harrison's house with the envelope in hand, all the proof there, organized, irrefutable. I got in the car and sat there for a few minutes, just breathing, processing everything I'd discovered. Emily and Brian were drowning, desperate, and desperate people, as Mr. Harrison had said, are capable of anything. But I was capable too, capable of fighting, of defending myself, of not letting them trample me. I started the car and headed to Thomas's office. It was time for the final confrontation. It was time for Emily and Brian to discover that the elderly mother they humiliated, that they tried to silence, had come back with enough ammunition to end their plan once and for all. And this time, there was no going back. Thomas was waiting for me at the office, the desk already full of documents, open folders, highlighters scattered around. When I walked in, he stood up with that professional posture, but with a gleam in his eyes that revealed he was ready for war. Margaret, good to see you back. I got your photos last night. This is pure gold. I sat in the chair across from him, placed the envelope Mr. Harrison had given me on the desk, and took a deep breath. Thomas, I have more, much more. I spent the next hour telling everything, showing each document, each proof of Emily and Brian's absurd debts, the lies about the job, the secret negotiation with the New York investors. Thomas listened attentively, writing everything down, and as I spoke, I saw his smile growing. It wasn't malice. It was the satisfaction of a lawyer who knew he had an unbeatable case in his hands. Margaret, with all this, they have no defense, Thomas said, organizing the papers into separate piles. Document forgery, property invasion, unauthorized renovations, attempted fraud, coercion. This here is fuel for a criminal case. Criminal. The word echoed in the room. My daughter could be arrested. Brian, too. As much anger as I felt, as much betrayed as I felt, the idea of seeing Emily handcuffed, being taken away by police, it broke me. Is there another way? I asked, my voice weak. Thomas looked at me with understanding. There is. We can use all this as pressure. Call a meeting, present the evidence, and give them a choice. Stop this immediately. Return your house intact and walk away, or face full legal consequences. A choice. It was more than they deserved, but I was still a mother. I still had a thread of hope that Emily would wake up, see the madness she was doing. We scheduled the meeting for that late afternoon in my own house. Thomas insisted, "It has to be there. It's your property. They're the ones invading." He called the lawyer Emily had hired, the so-called Dr. Brennan, and informed him there were serious new evidence that needed to be discussed urgently. The tone was firm, leaving no room for refusal. Dr. Brennan tried to push it to another day, but Thomas was categorical. "It's today at 5, or I present everything directly to the district attorney tomorrow morning." Silence on the other end, then a defeated sigh. "We'll be there." I turned on my cell phone that had been off for weeks, and as expected, there were dozens of messages. I ignored them all and sent just one to Emily. "I'll be at my house at 5 p.m. You and Brian need to be there. Non-negotiable." I didn't sign it, didn't explain, just sent it, and waited. The hours until the meeting were the longest of my life. Thomas and I had lunch at a nearby cafe, reviewing the strategy. "Let me lead the conversation," he advised. "You stay calm, observe their reactions. When I ask, you speak, but not before." I agreed, but inside I was a hurricane. What was it going to be like seeing Emily after everything? After knowing about the debts, the lies, the coldness with which she'd planned to take everything from me? Would she feel shame, remorse, or would she continue with that mask of a concerned daughter who just wanted my best? At 4:30, we headed to my house. The contractors were still there, hammering, sawing, destroying. Thomas got out of the car with the posture of a general entering a battlefield. "Stop everything. Now." The men looked confused. "Who are you?" one of them asked. "Lawyer for the legitimate owner. And you're working illegally on an invaded property. I suggest you stop immediately, or you'll be included in the lawsuit." The tools fell silent one by one. We entered through the front door, the door I myself had locked weeks ago, and that was now wide open. The lock changed. Inside, it was worse than I imagined. Walls torn down, floor ripped up, everything covered in dust and debris. The kitchen where I made so many family meals was being remodeled with modern cabinets that had nothing to do with the house's style. The living room where Emily took her first steps had become a construction site. I felt tears coming, but held them back. This wasn't time for weakness. It was time for justice. Thomas put his hand on my shoulder. "Breathe. All this can be reversed. You're going to get your house back." I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. At 5 o'clock sharp, we heard cars stopping outside. My heart raced. Thomas straightened his tie, opened his briefcase with the documents. "Showtime," he murmured. And the door opened. Emily came in first, and when she saw me, she froze. Her face went through a sequence of emotions in seconds. Shock, fear, anger, and finally something that almost looked like guilt. But it didn't last long. Brian came right behind, accompanied by Dr. Brennan, a short man with glasses, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mom, you came back," Emily stuttered. I didn't respond, just stared at her, letting the silence do the work. Thomas stepped forward, his voice firm and professional. "Good afternoon. I'm Thomas Griffin, attorney for Mrs. Margaret Turner, legitimate and sole owner of this residence. Thank you for coming." Dr. Brennan tried to take control. "Mr. Griffin, I don't understand the urgency of this meeting." "My client has legal power of attorney," Thomas interrupted him. "Your client has a false power of attorney, and that's just the beginning of the crimes I'm going to list now." The silence that followed was chilling. Thomas began methodically, like a prosecutor presenting a case. He placed documents on the makeshift table the contractors had set up. First proof, graphological analysis showing the signature on the power of attorney is not Mrs. Turner's. Second proof, the medical reports were issued by a doctor Mrs. Turner never consulted, confirmed by the clinic itself. Third proof, photographic records of property invasion and unauthorized renovations. With each proof presented, I saw Emily's face getting paler, Brian starting to sweat, Dr. Brennan frantically flipping through papers trying to find a way out. But there wasn't one. Thomas continued. Fourth proof, recording of phone intimidation made by Mr. Brian against Mrs. Turner including threats of forced commitment and separation from her grandson. Brian swallowed hard. Emily looked at him with an expression I couldn't decipher. Was it betrayal? Surprise? She didn't know about the call? And finally, Thomas said, placing Mr. Harrison's envelope on the table, we have here complete documentation of Emily and Brian's financial situation. $300,000 in debt, Brian's unemployment hidden for a year, secret negotiations with New York investors to sell this property without the owner's consent. He paused dramatically. Forgery, invasion, coercion, attempted estate fraud against an elderly person. Each of these crimes can result in years in prison. Combined, well, you can imagine. Dr. Brennan was white. He tried to speak, but Thomas raised his hand. I'm not finished. Mrs. Turner, incredibly after everything you've done to her, is still willing to offer a way out. All eyes turned to me. It was my turn to speak. I stood up, every muscle in my body tense, and looked straight into the eyes of my ungrateful daughter who had put me through this hell. Emily, I began, and my voice came out firmer than I expected. You have a choice. You guys stop this now. You return my house exactly as it was, pay for the damages, nullify all these ridiculous attempts to take my property, and stay away from my life, completely. Or, I paused, letting the weight of the words fall. Or Thomas hands all this to the district attorney tomorrow morning and you face criminal charges, prison, criminal record, loss of custody of my grandson, public humiliation. You choose. Emily started crying, that convulsive, desperate crying. Mom, we were desperate. The debts. I didn't know what to do. Brian tried to defend himself. Margaret, you don't understand. We were going to lose everything. I exploded. And that gave you the right to rob me? To humiliate me? To try to declare me crazy? My voice echoed in the empty house, loaded with months of pain. You could have asked for real help. You could have been honest, but you chose to betray me, use me, discard me. The silence that fell was absolute. Dr. Brennan, clearly realizing he had no defense whatsoever, whispered something into Emily's ear. She nodded through her sobs. Brian was petrified, his face red, fists clenched. We accept the terms, Emily finally said, her voice breaking. We'll stop. We'll fix everything. Please, Mom, don't sue us. I'm begging you. I looked at her and, for the first time, I didn't feel sorry. I only felt an immense emptiness where unconditional love used to exist. You've got 72 hours to reverse everything, Thomas said, taking control again. Contractors paid and dismissed, house restored or full financial compensation for the damages, and documents signed relinquishing any claim to this property. 72 hours, 1 minute late, and I'm going straight to the police. Emily and Brian left with their heads down, defeated, followed by a visibly embarrassed Dr. Brennan. When the door closed, my legs failed, and Thomas caught me. You did it, he said. You won. But looking around at my destroyed house, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, because I'd just cut my daughter out of my life, and there was no going back. The following 72 hours were an eternity condensed into 3 days. Thomas had made it clear that any breach of the agreement would result in immediate criminal action, and Emily knew he wasn't bluffing. On the first day, the contractors came back, this time paid by Brian according to what I was told, not to renovate, but to undo the damage. They ripped out the modern kitchen cabinets, removed the iron gate they'd installed, began restoring the porch to its original style. I'd stop by a few times a day, watching from a distance, without going in. Each visit was like a stab to see my house in that state, but also a relief to know it was being recovered. Ruth would come with me, hold my hand, remind me to breathe. Everything's gonna be okay, Margaret. You were brave. You stood up for yourself, but courage and victory taste bitter when the price is losing a daughter. On the second day, Thomas called me with news. Margaret, they signed all the documents. Complete renunciation of any claim to the property, acknowledgement that the powers of attorney were fraudulent, commitment to financial compensation for the irreversible damages. Irreversible. Because no matter how hard they tried to fix things, some things had been destroyed forever. Just like my relationship with Emily. There's more, Thomas continued. Brian contacted the investors in New York and canceled the deal. They lost the deposit money they'd already received, about $20,000. They're even more underwater now. Part of me felt a pang of pity, but a bigger part, the one that had been humiliated, betrayed, almost destroyed, felt it was justice. They'd bet everything on a betrayal and lost. Consequences exist for a reason. On the third day, I went to the house for the first time since the confrontation. The contractors had done an impressive job considering the tight deadline. The porch was rebuilt, the white columns back, the wooden floor restored. Inside, there was still work to do, but the essentials were there. I walked through the rooms slowly, running my hand along the walls, feeling the house breathe again. It was like reuniting with an old friend after a terrible accident, hurt but alive. In the kitchen, I found a letter on the counter. I recognized Emily's handwriting immediately. My heart tightened. Part of me wanted to tear it up without reading it, but the other part, the mother who still existed somewhere inside me, needed to know what she had to say. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. The letter was short, handwritten, with stains that looked like dried tears. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. I let desperation, fear, and Brian's influence turn me into someone I don't recognize. You were always the best mother anyone could have, and I repaid you with betrayal. I have no words to express how much I regret it. I know I've lost you forever, and that's a pain I'll carry for the rest of my life. I won't reach out to you. I won't call you. I won't try to justify the unjustifiable. I just wanted you to know that underneath all this madness, I'm still your daughter, and I'll spend the rest of my days trying to be someone you could be proud of again, even if you never know it. I love you. I always loved you, and I'm sorry, Emily. I folded the letter slowly, tears flowing freely now. It wasn't enough. It never would be. But it was something. It was the acknowledgement from an ungrateful daughter that she'd destroyed something precious. Thomas appeared at the door, a folder under his arm. Everything all right, Margaret? I quickly wiped my tears and nodded. Everything's all right. He came in, looked around, approving the contractor's work. They fulfilled the agreement. The house is being restored. The financial compensation has been deposited, $50,000 for the damages that can't be undone and for the distress. And I prepared the final documents. He opened the folder and showed me. Restraining order against Emily and Brian. They couldn't come near me or the property indefinitely. Legal documentation reinforcing that I was the sole owner, with no loopholes for future attempts. Permanent block on any power of attorney or legal representation by them on my behalf. You're protected now, Margaret. Completely protected. I signed each document, and with each signature, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. But there was one last thing Thomas needed to tell me, and from his demeanor, it wasn't good. Margaret, you need to know. Emily and Brian are separating. My heart jumped. What? Thomas sighed. It seems like the pressure from all this, plus the still existing debts, plus the total humiliation of being exposed. The marriage couldn't take it. Brian blames Emily for giving in. Emily blames Brian for starting it all. It's a mess. Part of me, the mother part, wanted to call Emily, ask how she was, offer support. But the part that had been betrayed held back my impulse. It wasn't my responsibility anymore. Emily had made choices, and choices have consequences. And my grandson? I asked, my voice failing. Brian's moving out. Emily's getting custody. She got a second job to try to pay off the debts on her own. My heart broke, but I couldn't do anything, not without putting myself at risk again. The following weeks were of literal and emotional reconstruction. I hired a different crew to finish the house repairs, this time chosen by me, working under my orders. I wanted to restore every detail to what it was before, every memory preserved. Ruth came almost every day, helped me choose paints, fabrics, furniture. Mr. Harrison offered to help with the garden, replanting the magnolias that had been pulled out during the construction. Denise, my friend from Savannah, called every week to see how I was doing. You're picking yourself back up, Margaret. I knew you were strong. And slowly, I started to believe it. Yes, I'd lost my daughter. Yes, my heart was broken, but I was still standing, still fighting, still alive. And that, in that moment, was enough. 2 months after the confrontation, the house finally looked like a home again. It wasn't identical to what it was before. Some scars remain, but it was mine again. I sat on the restored porch in a new rocking chair, but in the style of the old ones, and looked at the garden where the magnolias were beginning to bloom again. I had some iced tea, felt the afternoon breeze, and for the first time in months, I breathed without feeling a weight on my chest. I had won, not the way I wanted. There was no reconciliation, no happy ending of a reunited family. But I had recovered my dignity, my house, my autonomy. I had said no to those who tried to step on me. I had defended myself when it would have been easier to give up. And that, I realized, was also a victory. A silent, painful, but real victory. One afternoon, a few months later, I was at the supermarket when I saw Emily. She was in the pasta aisle, too thin, with deep dark circles, pushing a cart with my grandson inside. He'd grown so much. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. Our eyes met for a second. I saw in her what seemed like genuine regret, exhaustion, defeat. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but I looked away and kept walking. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, but because some bridges, when burned, can't be rebuilt. And as much as it hurt, I needed to choose my peace. I needed to choose my mental health. I needed to choose myself. And in that moment, choosing myself meant moving forward without looking back, without carrying the weight of someone who didn't value me when they had the chance. That night, sitting in the restored kitchen, preparing dinner just for myself, I realized something important. I had survived. I'd gone through the worst nightmare an elderly mother can face, being betrayed by her own daughter, and I'd come out on the other side still whole. Hurt? Yes. Different? Definitely. But alive, free, and in control of my own story. The house around me was no longer just walls and memories of the past. It was my present and my future. It was proof that I could start over, that I still had value, that I wasn't that fragile, manipulable woman that Emily and that gold-digger son-in-law thought they could deceive. I was Margaret Turner. A widow, yes. A mother without a daughter, yes. But also a strong woman, a warrior, a survivor. And this real story was far from over. Actually, I felt like I was just beginning a new chapter. A chapter where I was the protagonist, and where no one was going to take control of my own life away from me again. 6 months had passed since the day of the confrontation, and my life had changed in ways I never imagined possible. The house was completely restored, better than before, actually. I'd taken advantage of the forced renovations to make some improvements I'd always wanted. A more functional kitchen while maintaining the classic charm, an adapted bathroom to make my mobility easier as I age, and most importantly, I transformed the old guest room into a painting studio. That had always been my secret dream, something I said I'd do when I had time. Well, I discovered that life doesn't wait for you to have time. You need to make the time. And that's exactly what I did. I bought canvases, brushes, oil paints, an easel, and I started painting. I wasn't good at first, but it didn't matter. It was mine. It was my passion. It was my form of healing. Mornings gained a new routine. I'd wake up early, make coffee in the kitchen that was now truly mine, and go up to the studio. There, with sunlight coming through the window overlooking the garden, I'd paint. Charleston landscapes, the ocean my husband loved so much, the magnolias in the yard, memories transformed into colors. Each brushstroke was therapy. Each completed canvas was a small victory against the sadness that threatened to swallow me. Ruth would come almost every weekend, look at my paintings and say, "Margaret, you've got talent. You should exhibit these." I'd laugh, thought it was an exaggeration. But secretly, I was proud. For the first time in decades, I was doing something just for myself. Not to be a good mother, good wife, good grandmother. Just to be Margaret. And that was liberating in a way I didn't know I needed. The neighbors became my new family. Mr. Harrison continued being my great friend and protector. He who had saved me with that crucial information. Mrs. Peterson, who lived 2 houses down, started including me in the ladies' gardening group in the neighborhood. Every Saturday morning, a group of 6 women would gather at alternating houses to take care of gardens, exchange seedlings, drink iced tea, and gossip in the good sense. They were women like me, widows, divorcees, some with ungrateful children who had disappointed them, others with loving families but wanting their own independence. There, I wasn't judged. I wasn't the mother who lost her daughter or the victim of family betrayal. I was just Margaret, the new member of the group, the one who painted beautiful pictures and made a killer lemon cake. One of the most unexpected surprises came from young Marcus, the lawyer who lived on the corner and had offered help during my crisis. He was in his early 30s, easy smile, always running here and there with folders under his arm. One afternoon, he knocked on my door with an unusual proposal. "Mrs. Turner, I'm putting together a community legal support group for elderly people who suffer financial abuse from family members. It's more common than we imagine. And I wanted to know if you'd be willing to share your story, without personal details, of course, to help other people identify the signs and protect themselves." I was paralyzed for a moment. Share my emotional story? But then I thought, how many other Margarets are out there being manipulated, pressured, robbed by those who should protect them? If my pain could help someone, I accept, I replied. The meetings started monthly in a community hall at the local church. At first, there were only 5 or 6 people, timid, elderly people, embarrassed to admit they were being abused by their own children, grandchildren, nephews. I shared my story, and I saw tears in their eyes. They weren't tears of pity. They were of identification, of relief at not being alone. "I thought it was just me," an 80-year-old lady said. "My son's doing the same thing, and I didn't know if I was being dramatic." Dramatic. How many times did I think that myself? How many times did I doubt my own feelings because mothers don't give up on their children? But there, in that group, we learned together that love doesn't mean accepting abuse. That family isn't defined by blood, but by respect. And that saying no doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human, with healthy boundaries. The group grew. Within 6 months, we were more than 20 people. Marcus brought other volunteer lawyers, social workers, even a retired police officer who taught about how to document evidence of abuse. We became a small support network, and I, the woman who months ago was broken, fleeing to Savannah, became one of the leaders. Not because I was special, but because I had survived, because I had fought, and because I wasn't ashamed to tell my real story, no matter how painful it was. Each meeting strengthened me a little more. Each person I helped defend themselves reminded me that my pain had purpose, that I wasn't just a victim. I was a survivor who could make a difference in others' lives. One autumn afternoon, I was painting in the studio when my cell phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, but answered. "Hello?" Silence on the other end. Then a voice I hadn't heard in months. "Grandma?" My heart stopped. It was my grandson. His voice had changed, gotten deeper. He was growing up. "Hi, sweetheart," I managed to say, my voice choked. "Grandma, I miss you." Instant tears. "I miss you too, dear. Every day." Silence again. Then he said something that broke and healed me at the same time. "Mom doesn't know I'm calling, but I wanted you to know that I love you, and that I didn't agree with anything they did." He was 8 years old. 8 years old and already carrying the weight of that situation. "I love you too, so much, and none of this is your fault, you hear me? None of it." "Okay, Grandma. I gotta hang up. Bye." And the call dropped. I stood there, holding the phone, crying, but it wasn't just sadness. It was hope. He remembered me. He loved me. And one day, when he was older, maybe we could rebuild something. The months kept passing, and I kept rediscovering myself. I started watercolor classes at the community college, me, a 68-year-old woman, sitting in a room with 20-year-olds. At first I felt out of place, but I soon realized that art has no age. My professor, an eccentric gentleman about 50 years old, praised my work. "Margaret, you have a rare sensitivity. Your paintings have soul. Soul." Because I put my pain, my overcoming, my story in each painting. They weren't just landscapes, they were pieces of me. I participated in a local exhibition of amateur artists, and 3 of my canvases were sold. 3. People I didn't even know paid money for something I created. It was one of the most gratifying sensations I'd ever experienced. It wasn't about the money, it was about being seen, being valued, having my work recognized. One night, sitting on the porch, that same porch where it all began, I looked at the starry sky and talked to my husband, like I always do. Would you believe what happened to me? What I did? I defended myself. I fought. I won. And I swear I felt a gentle breeze, like I always feel when I talk to him, as if it were his answer. "I always knew you were strong." I smiled to myself. Strong. Me. The woman who was almost destroyed by her own daughter. The elderly mother who was called crazy, incapable, selfish, but who got up, who didn't accept being a victim forever, who recovered not just her house, but her dignity. It wasn't the happy ending from movies. There was no magical reconciliation, no accepted apology. But it was my happy ending. My way, with my own rules. At 68 years old, I'd learned life's most important lesson. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to say no to what hurts you and yes to what feels good. My house was standing, beautiful, restored, full of light and new purposes. My life had meaning again. Not through Emily, not through being a mother or grandmother, but through being Margaret, painter, friend, community leader, survivor, warrior. And as I rocked in that chair with iced tea in hand and the sunset painting the sky orange and pink, I understood that life hadn't ended when my daughter betrayed me. Actually, in a strange and painful way, it had started over. And this time, I was in control. This time, no one was going to take what was mine away from me. This time, I lived for myself. And that, I discovered, was the greatest freedom of all. And that's how I, Margaret Turner, a 68-year-old elderly mother who almost lost everything, learned that life can start over when you least expect it. Did I lose my daughter? Yes. Does my heart still bleed for it? Every day. But you know what I gained? I gained myself back. I gained my dignity, my house, my freedom. I learned that true love doesn't diminish you, it strengthens you. And that family isn't about blood. It's about respect, loyalty, and reciprocity. That house they almost stole from me is still standing, more beautiful than ever. And I'm still standing too. Because the biggest lesson I learned was this. You can be knocked down 1,000 times, but as long as you have the strength to get up one more time, you haven't lost. You're just preparing to win in a way you never imagined possible. And you, what would you do if you were in my place? Could you forgive an ungrateful daughter after all this? Or would the pain be too great? Have you ever gone through a family betrayal that made you question everything you believed about love and loyalty? Share here in the comments. Your story might help someone who's going through the same thing right at this moment. Sometimes we just need to know we're not alone, that other people survived, and that it's possible to rebuild your life even when everything seems lost. If this emotional story touched your heart, if you felt every word, every pain, every victory with me, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss other stories that bring real-life lessons and make us reflect on our own choices and relationships. Because life is made of stories like this. Stories of ordinary people who faced extraordinary situations and came out the other side transformed. And who knows, maybe the next story is exactly what you need to hear today. Thank you for staying here with me until the end. From the bottom of my heart, thank you.